The sun rose gently over the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and orange as Marcus stepped outside, the weight of another day already pressing on his shoulders. He had woken up early, as always, intending to walk the stretch of his land before the heat rolled in. His ranch was his pride. Every fence post he had hammered, every trough he had set, and every acre he had nurtured was proof of years of dedication. But as his boots crunched against the gravel, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, where the open view of his land should have been, stood a brand new fence. It wasn't a casual structure, nor was it the kind a neighbor might put up in good faith to mark boundaries. This was tall, reinforced steel, spanning across the main road that led into his property. A heavy chain and lock glared at him in the morning light, deliberately placed to send one message: "You're not welcome to access your own land unless we say so." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't need to guess who was behind it. For months, the HOA from the new subdivision nearby had been circling him like vultures. At first, it had been polite letters offering to buy his land. Then came the not-so-polite visits, the concerned neighbors who suggested it might be better if his property became part of their controlled community. When he refused, time and again, their tone shifted. Rumors began to spread in town about his ranch falling apart, about him being behind on taxes, about the place being unsafe. None of it was true, but truth had never been their weapon, pressure was. And now, this fence was their boldest move yet. They had taken the one access road that passed through a sliver of land touching the subdivision and locked it down as if he were some intruder trespassing on what he had worked his whole life to own. He walked slowly up to the fence, running a hand along the cold metal. The steel posts were freshly set in the ground. He could still see the wet cement drying at the base. Whoever had installed this hadn't wasted time. They wanted him to wake up and see it, to feel boxed in, to realize he couldn't move livestock, equipment, or even his own truck without their permission. Marcus gritted his teeth, a mix of anger and determination rising in his chest. He wasn't the kind of man to back down, and they should have known better. His father had raised him on this very land, teaching him that a man's home, his work, and his freedom were worth fighting for. The HOA might have thought this stunt would break him, but they had only lit a fire inside him. As he stood there, staring at the locked gate, a memory came flooding back of his father telling him when he was just a boy, "The land don't lie, son. You put in the sweat, the land gives back. But you gotta guard it, because folks who don't know the work will always want to take what they didn't earn." That lesson had never rung truer than now. These people hadn't lifted a finger to build what he had, yet they wanted to strip it away under the disguise of rules and community standards. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, "They think a fence is gonna stop me. They don't even know who they're messing with." The rest of the day, Marcus moved around his ranch with a simmering tension. He checked on his horses, fed the cattle, and repaired a section of his own fencing, all while his eyes kept drifting back toward the blockade on the road. It felt like a scar on his land, an insult not just to his rights but to his dignity. When evening came, instead of collapsing into bed, he sat at his kitchen table with papers spread out before him. He began digging into the county records, cross-referencing maps and property deeds he had inherited from his father. He had a hunch, and he was determined to confirm it. Hours passed as he flipped through documents, tracing lines on survey maps. The ranch had always been straightforward. Passed down through generations, it was his legally and without dispute. But the road, that little stretch that the HOA had fenced off, was the tricky part. It cut through a parcel that technically wasn't under his ownership but had been left neglected for years. Marcus leaned back in his chair, realization dawning. The HOA must have acquired rights to it, or at least thought they had. But as he dug deeper, he discovered something they had overlooked. The land with the road wasn't formally listed under the HOA's control. It was still up for grabs in county records due to a lapse in the previous owner's estate. A slow grin spread across Marcus's face. They had fenced him out thinking they had the upper hand, but they had made one fatal mistake. They didn't own the very piece of land they were using as leverage. That meant it was still fair game, and Marcus had just enough fight in him to make sure it would become his. For the next several days, he went about his work quietly, never mentioning the fence to anyone in town, never giving the HOA the satisfaction of a public fight. He greeted people at the feed store with the same calm smile, bought supplies as usual, and waved at neighbors as though nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, he was working with a real estate lawyer, drawing up the paperwork to claim ownership of that parcel outright. It wasn't cheap, and it wasn't simple, but Marcus wasn't a stranger to hard work. Every dollar he spent felt like an investment not just in land but in his freedom. One evening, as he stood again before the locked gate, the sun setting behind it in a blaze of orange, he felt a strange sense of calm. To the HOA, that chain represented control, dominance, a victory over him. But to Marcus, it was already defeated. Because soon, very soon, the key to that gate, and the land beneath it, would belong to him. And when that day came, the same people who had tried to box him in would realize they had caged themselves out of their own game. He touched the lock one last time before turning back to his house. His father's words echoed again in his mind, steady and grounding, "Guard what's yours." Marcus smiled faintly, his determination sharpened. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The papers were signed within 2 weeks, and Marcus had barely slept the night before he went to the courthouse to make it official. The process had been slower than he liked. Endless signatures, waiting for records to update, and making sure every legal string was tied tightly so the HOA couldn't wriggle through any loopholes. But finally, it was done. The land that contained the access road, the very strip the HOA had blocked off with their towering fence, now belonged solely to him. As he walked out of the courthouse with the documents in hand, he couldn't help but laugh under his breath. They had wanted to box him in, and instead, he had outmaneuvered them with a single, decisive move. The best part was knowing they had no idea what was coming. That evening, Marcus drove home and parked his truck right in front of the fence, just staring at it. It stood there as if mocking him, the gate chained and padlocked, keeping him from what was already his. But he didn't feel anger anymore, only anticipation. He had the papers, he had the proof, and soon he'd have the key. All he had to do was bide his time until the HOA realized the tables had turned. The following morning, the HOA board members arrived unannounced, just as they always did. 3 of them stepped out of their shiny SUVs, 2 men in suits and 1 woman in a wide-brimmed hat, clutching a folder filled with papers. Marcus didn't even bother to step off his porch. He just leaned against the railing, arms folded, and waited for them to approach. "Mr. Johnson," the woman said crisply, her tone rehearsed and patronizing, "we've noticed you've been ignoring the notices regarding the restrictions we've put in place. As you can see, the fence is staying. This land is part of our community development, and you're trespassing every time you attempt to pass through that gate." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's so." One of the men nodded firmly. "It would be in your best interest to sell now, before legal complications make things worse. You're outnumbered here. You don't belong in this community anymore." Marcus let their words hang in the air for a long moment before he chuckled. "Funny you say that," he finally replied, walking slowly down from his porch with a folded piece of paper in his hand. He waved it at them casually. "Because as of last week, this little stretch of land you're standing on, it's mine. Bought it fair and square. Which means," he walked right up to the fence and tapped the gate with his knuckle, "this fence, this lock, this whole thing belongs to me now." The woman blinked in confusion, her confident expression faltering. "That's impossible. We acquired rights to this road when the subdivision was approved." "Maybe you thought you did," Marcus said, unfolding the deed and holding it up. "But county records say otherwise. Y'all were so busy building fences, you forgot to buy the dirt underneath. That dirt is mine now, which means the only key to this gate belongs to me." The color drained from their faces. For the first time since the fight began, Marcus saw fear flicker in their eyes. They glanced at each other, silently calculating, realizing they had been outplayed. The man in the suit tried to recover his composure, puffing his chest out. "Well, if that's the case, we'll have to take this to court." "This isn't over," Marcus smirked. "Take it wherever you like. Paperwork's solid, and until a judge says otherwise, the only people trespassing are you." With that, he turned, unlocked his truck, and pulled out a brand new key that gleamed in the sunlight. He walked up to the gate, slid the key into the lock, and with a loud click, the chain fell loose. Slowly, deliberately, he swung the gate open and drove his truck straight through, leaving the stunned HOA board members standing helplessly on the side of the road. The sound of his tires crunching over the gravel felt like victory. Word spread fast. Within days, the entire community knew what had happened. The same HOA that had strutted around town claiming control over everything had been checkmated by the very man they tried to box in. Neighbors who once avoided Marcus out of fear of the HOA's influence now began tipping their hats to him, offering handshakes, even apologizing for not standing up earlier. For Marcus, though, it wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about peace, the kind of peace that came from knowing no one could threaten what was his again. Still, the HOA didn't give up easily. Letters poured in, this time more frantic than authoritative, filled with demands and half-baked legal threats. Marcus filed them neatly into a drawer without bothering to respond. The difference now was power. He wasn't reacting to them anymore. He was in control. They had built a fence meant to trap him, but now, ironically, it trapped them. The only gate into their subdivision crossed his land, and without his permission, they had no access for construction vehicles or maintenance crews. The fence had become their prison, not his. Weeks passed, and Marcus carried on with his work as though nothing had happened. He tended to his cattle, repaired his barns, and rode his horses across the open fields. The land seemed to breathe freer, as if it too had shrugged off the weight of the HOA's arrogance. On evenings when the sky burned with shades of pink and gold, Marcus would sit on his porch and watch the fence in the distance, not as a symbol of oppression but as a reminder that patience and persistence always beat intimidation. One Saturday morning, he noticed a group of HOA members gathered near the gate again, this time pleading rather than posturing. They waved when they saw him, calling his name, offering to work out a deal. Marcus took his time walking over, his hat tilted against the sun. "Mr. Johnson," one of them began nervously, "we realize now there may have been some oversights in how the property lines were handled. Perhaps we can negotiate an arrangement that benefits everyone." Marcus looked at them evenly. "You mean an arrangement that benefits you? Let me make something clear. I didn't buy this land to sell it back, and I didn't keep this ranch all these years just to let someone else tell me what to do with it. You came onto my property, tried to fence me out, and treated me like I didn't belong. Now you're on the outside, and the only key's in my pocket. That's the arrangement." They fell silent, their shoulders sagging in defeat. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked back toward his house, the gravel crunching under his boots. The wind carried his final words back to them. "Next time you build a fence, make sure you know whose land you're standing on." From that day on, the HOA kept their distance. They still managed their subdivision, still held their meetings, still made rules for their little patch of houses. But none of it touched Marcus anymore. His ranch stood firm, free and untouchable, a testament to resilience and cleverness. And every time he passed through the gate with his key, he smiled, knowing he had turned their own weapon into his greatest victory.